Good morning. You're listening to WVUD HD2 Newark, The Basement. I'm Zach Davis, and this is Our Brief Hour, where we celebrate the poetry and prose that make our brief hour on this earth a beautiful one. Today I'm joined by my mother, Lisa.
Hello again.
And we'll be looking at Ophelia from Hamlet. Do you have any introductory remarks on the subject? This is going to be your show, I think.
Most of my life, which has been longer than I'd like to say, I've wondered at who Ophelia is, and at each pivotal stage in my life, she has been somebody different. And so it's interesting to do this with Zach because I get to think again, who is Ophelia? And why is a character who really doesn't have much of a profile in this play so critical to the development and our engagement with this play?
We start with the first Ophelia scene, where she's walking with her father Polonius and her brother Laertes to see Laertes off. He's about to head to France to have a good time, we suspect. So first, Laertes pulls Ophelia aside. "My necessaries are embarked. Farewell. And sister, as the winds give benefit and convoy as assistant, do not sleep, but let me hear from you."
Do you doubt that?
For Hamlet and the trifling of his favor hold it a fashion and a toy in blood, a violet in the youth of primy nature, forward, not permanent, sweet, not lasting, the perfume and suppliance of a minute, no more.
No more, but so?
Think it no more. For nature crescent does not grow alone in thews and bulk, but as this temple waxes, the inward service of the mind and soul grows wide withal. Perhaps he loves you now, and now no soil nor caudle doth besmirch the virtue of his will, but you must fear. His greatness weighed, his will is not his own, for he himself is subject to his birth. He may not, as unvalued persons do, carve for himself, for on his choice depends the safety and health of this whole state, and therefore must his choice be circumscribed unto the voice and yielding of that body whereof he is the head. Then if he says he loves you, it fits your wisdom so far to believe it, as he in his particular act and place may give his saying deed, which is no further than the main voice of Denmark goes withal. Then weigh what loss your honor may sustain, if with too credent ears you list his songs, or lose your heart or your chaste treasure open to his unmastered importunity. Fear it, Ophelia. Fear it, my dear sister, and keep you in the rear of your affection, out of the shot and danger of desire. The chariest maid is prodigal enough if she unmask her beauty to the moon. Virtue itself scapes not calumnious strokes. The canker galls the infants of the spring too oft before their buttons be disclosed, and in the morn and liquid dew of youth, contagious blastments are most imminent. Be wary, then. Best safety lies in fear. Youth to itself rebels, though none else near.
I shall the effect of this good lesson keep as watchman to my heart. But, good my brother, do not, as some ungracious bastards do, show me the steep and thorny way to heaven, whiles like a puffed and reckless libertine himself the primrose path of dalliance treads, and reeks not his own reed.
Oh, fear me not. I stay too long, but here my father comes. So Polonius enters and gives Laertes his famous final piece of advice, and he's delivering this as much to Ophelia as he is to Laertes. "Yet here, Laertes, aboard, aboard, for shame! The wind sits in the shoulder of your sail, and you are stayed for. There, my blessing with thee, and these few precepts in thy memory see thou character. Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought his act. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. Those friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel. but do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new-hatched, unfledged comrade. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear't that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich, not gaudy, for the apparel oft proclaims the man, and they in France of the best rank and station are of a most select and generous chief in that. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee. The time invites you, go, your servants tend. And then Laertes says, Farewell, Ophelia, and remember well what I have said to you.
'Tis in my memory locked, and you yourself shall keep the key of it.
So now Polonius and Ophelia are strolling back to the castle. What is't, Ophelia, he hath said to you?
So please you, something touching the Lord Hamlet.
Marry, well bethought. 'Tis told me he hath very oft of late given private time to you, and you yourself have of your audience been most free and bounteous. If it be so, as so 'tis put on me, and in that way of caution I must tell you, you do not understand yourself so clearly as it behooves my daughter and your honor. What is between you? Give me up the truth.
He hath, my lord, of late made many tenders of his affection to me.
Affection! Pooh! You speak like a green girl, unsifted in such perilous circumstance. Do you believe his tenders, as you call them?
I do not know, my lord, what I should think.
Marry, I'll teach you. Think yourself a baby, that you have ta'en these tenders for true pay which are not sterling. Tender yourself more dearly, or, not to crack the wind of the poor phrase, running it thus, you'll tender me a fool.
My lord, he hath importuned me with love in honourable fashion.
Ay, fashion you may call it. Go to.
And hath given countenance to his speech, my lord, with almost all the holy vows of heaven.
Ay, springes to catch woodcocks. I do know when the blood burns how prodigal the soul lends the tongue vows. These blazes, daughter, giving more light than heat, extinct in both, even in their promise, as it is a-making, you must not take for fire. From this time be somewhat scanter of your maiden presence. Set your entreatments at a higher rate than a command to parley. For Lord Hamlet believes so much in him that he is young, and with a larger tether may he walk than may be given you. In few, Ophelia, do not believe his vows, for they are brokers, not of that dye which their investments show, but mere implorators of unholy suits, breathing like sanctified and pious bawds the better to beguile. This is for all. I would not in plain terms from this time forth have you so slander any moment leisure as to give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet. Look to't, I charge you. Come your ways.
I shall obey, my lord.
So here we're hearing two different expressions of the same basic concern. Both of Ophelia's family members, both men, are worried that Hamlet is using Ophelia. The lewd interpretation is that they're worried Hamlet is using Ophelia for sex, but the more generous interpretation is that Hamlet may really believe that he's in love, but according to Polonius, he's young, and young people often have they're all heat and no flame. It's a love that won't last. And as for Laertes, the love may be genuine, but Hamlet isn't just answerable to himself. He's answerable to the whole state. And so he'll need to find a wife for political reasons rather than reasons of the heart. So Laertes seems like he's a little bit more willing to grant Ophelia a true bond with Hamlet, and their worries are more external. And Polonius is harking back to his youth of long ago and saying, boys just do these things. Boys will be boys. Don't believe it, and don't give up your maiden virtue for it. Tender yourself a little more dearly than that.
And I think there's also a bigger picture if we stick to this question of who is Ophelia. These are probably the two most important men in her life, in her family. Hamlet is of much shorter acquaintance, we would think, at least romantically. And these two men have had sway over her decisions. I think in, this age, it was true of many noble families. Women didn't have a wide range of choice here. They did as they were told. And in this case, we have both brother and father telling Ophelia what she's to do, and she is expected to obey. So a lot of literature that evaluates who Ophelia is suggests that this is a sign of her oppression, that she has been oppressed all of her life, and this oppression is what defines her. This oppression is what she wishes to be free of. And ultimately, when she is freed of it, it sends her down a very murky path.
And at the same time, though, Polonius is telling Laertes, to thine own self be true. Well, and then he turns around and tells Ophelia, don't believe Hamlet. Don't act on any sort of passion you have for Hamlet. There's what I assume many commentators would see as a double standard there. Laertes is able to go off and, no matter what he says to Ophelia, he's going to go off and, sleep with prostitutes and gamble and have all the fun he's going to have. And Polonius acknowledges this in the very next scene, where he actually sets a retainer of some sort to go spy on Laertes to see how he's behaving in France. But Ophelia doesn't get that luxury. In the next scene, this is after Hamlet has seen the ghost and resolved to start down the path that will end with the revenge he'll take on Claudius. And Ophelia rushes into Polonius's room one night. How now, Ophelia? What's the matter?
Oh, my lord, I've been so affrighted.
With what, in the name of God?
My lord, as I was sewing in my closet, Lord Hamlet, with his doublet, all unbraced, no hat on his head, his stockings fouled, ungartered, and downgyved to his ankle, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous in purport as if he'd been loosed out of hell, to speak of horrors, he comes before me.
Mad for thy love?
My lord, I do not know, but truly I do fear it.
What said he?
He took me by the wrist and held me hard. Then goes he to the length of all his arm, and with his other hand thus o'er his brow, he falls to such perusal of my face as he would draw it. Long stayed he so, at last, a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head, thus waving up and down, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound as it did seem to shatter all his bulk and end his being. Now done, he lets me go, and with his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes, for out of doors he went without their helps, and to the last bended their light on me.
Come, go with me. I will go see the king. This is the very ecstasy of love, whose violent property foredoes itself, and leads the will to desperate undertakings, as oft as any passion under heaven that does afflict our natures. I am sorry. What, have you given him any hard words of late?
Oh, no, my good lord, but as you did command, I did repel his fetters, and denied his access to me.
That hath made him mad. I am sorry that with better heed and judgment I had not quoted him. I feared he did but trifle, and meant to wreck thee. But beshrew my jealousy! By heaven, it is as proper to our age to cast beyond ourselves in our opinion as it is common for the younger sort to lack discretion. Come, go we to the king. This must be known. which, being kept close, might move more grief to hide than hate to utter love. I always imagine this as Hamlet's last goodbye to Ophelia, and possibly one of the last true, unmad things that he does. Things, in other words, without ulterior motives. Because as he says in the ghost scene, he's, to Horatio and to Marcellus, I'm going to do a lot of crazy seeming things. Don't betray my cover. I'm just doing this to establish a reputation that'll help me get closer to Claudius and enact my revenge on him. So I imagined that he runs to Ophelia right after this encounter with the ghost, and needs to say some final goodbye to her because he has maybe some premonition or maybe just some suspicion that the things he's going to have to do might end up hurting her.
And the sadness here is that in explaining how he plans to get closer to Claudius, how he plans to take the threat of detection and redirect it, or at least absolve himself through his own bizarre behavior, he doesn't tell Ophelia. Mm-hmm. And when he doesn't tell Ophelia, when he doesn't include her as a lover might include his beloved, he sort of betrays her on some level. He pushes her at arm's length as well. And I see this scene as the beginning of their falling apart. And it's the scene that it makes me want to just shove them together and go, would you guys just talk this one out?
Yeah, he has the chance to get her on his side, the way he gets Horatio and Marcellus on his side, but he doesn't take it. Instead, he bids her goodbye. At least that's how it seems to me. And I also found it interesting that Hamlet doesn't have a voice in this, that this is perhaps one of his last sane moments or one of his first insane moments, although I don't think that we can draw that dichotomy as quite as simply as that. In terms of Hamlet's mental state throughout this play. But this all comes through Ophelia's eyes, and Hamlet isn't even present. And I always found that interesting, that this moment that seems fairly portentous to me comes from Ophelia entirely. And of course, in one of the many times in this play that someone realizes something too late, Polonius realizes, or at least thinks he realizes, that the love that Hamlet has for Ophelia was true all along. Polonius and Claudius have already been trying to figure out what is causing Hamlet's behavior, because they think that Hamlet's been in mourning for his father for what seems to them to be too long, so they're trying to figure out why he's acting this way. And Polonius finally comes up with the explanation that it's all out of love sickness for Ophelia. And in a classic case of confirmation bias, he keeps seeing that in Hamlet's actions, even as we see that Hamlet's actions might have nothing to do with Ophelia at all.
So, Polonius and Claudius, who is actually Hamlet's uncle, who married Hamlet's mother upon the death of Hamlet's father, contrive to watch Hamlet and Ophelia together to see how they interact. And they've set it all up, how they're to come together. And that's what's happening in this scene.
Hamlet has just finished his famous to be or not to be speech. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia! Nymph, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered.
Good my lord, how does your honour for this many a day?
I humbly thank you. Well, well, well.
My lord, I have remembrances of yours that I have longed to redeliver. I pray you, now receive them.
No, not I. I never gave you aught.
My honoured lord, you know right well you did, and with them words of so sweet breath composed as made the things more rich. Their perfume lost, take these again, for to the noble mind rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind. There, my lord.
Are you honest?
My lord.
Are you fair?
What means your lordship?
That if you be honest and fair, your honesty should admit no discourse to your beauty.
Could beauty, my lord, have better commerce than with honesty?
Aye, truly, for the power of beauty will sooner transform honesty from what it is to a bawd than the force of honesty can translate beauty into his likeness. This was sometime a paradox, but now the time gives it proof. I did love you once.
Indeed, my lord, you made me believe so.
You should not have believed me, for virtue cannot so inoculate our old stock, but we shall relish of it. I loved you not.
I was the more deceived.
Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent, honest, but yet I could accuse me of such things that it were better my mother had not borne me. I am very proud, revengeful, ambitious, with more offences at my beck than I have thoughts to put them in, imagination to give them shape, or time to act them in. What should such fellows as I do crawling between earth and heaven? We are errant knaves all. Believe none of us. Go thy ways to a nunnery. Where's your father?
At home, my lord?
Let the doors be shut upon him, that he may play the fool nowhere but in his own house. Farewell.
Oh, help him, you sweet heavens.
If thou dost marry, I'll give thee this plague for thy dowry. Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to a nunnery. Go. Farewell. Or if thou wilt needs marry a fool, for wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. To a nunnery. Go, and quickly too. Farewell.
Oh, heavenly powers, restore him.
I have heard of your paintings too, well enough. God has given you one face, and you make yourselves another. You jig, you amble, and you lisp, and nickname God's creatures, and make your wantonness your ignorance. Go to, I'll no more on't. It hath made me mad. I say, we will have no more marriages. Those that are married already, all but one, shall live. The rest shall keep as they are. To a nunnery. Go.
Oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown! The courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mould of form, the observed of all observers, quite down. And I, of ladies most deject and wretched, that sucked the honey of his music vows, now see that noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled out of tune and harsh, that unmatched form and feature of blown youth blasted with ecstasy. Ah, woe is me, to have seen what I have seen. See what I see.
So much ink has been spilled trying to figure out what on earth is going on in this scene. The most obvious thing that we need to point out is that nunnery at the time was slang for brothel.
Often, not always.
Well, often, right. And of course Shakespeare is playing on that ambiguity. So Hamlet might be telling Ophelia, go to an actual nunnery, like a religious order, and be chaste for the rest of your life, or go be a prostitute. And both seem to fit with this kind of bizarre dual vision he has of women. Like this is Hamlet in his most bent out of shape, it seems to me, at least. And he, as the scene goes on, he starts seeing Ophelia almost as a stand-in for women in general. And scholars have commented that Shakespeare seemed to have a real thing against makeup and women doing a lot to alter and improve their appearance. And of course, here Hamlet is talking about painted faces and things like that. And Ophelia just kind of becomes the sounding board for this anger, a lot of which is directed at his mother, because of course his mother married her dead husband's brother very soon after her dead husband died, and Hamlet sees this as incest and betrayal, and it's kind of what's driving him through the play at this point. And Ophelia kind of she's collateral damage in this.
I've often wondered, given her last little monologue, how truly devastated she is by this. I mean, I think it's heartbreaking, but does she know him well enough to find it, hugely devastating, as sort of the ground we're preparing for these seeds we're going to plant, and they're going to grow into this monstrous unpleasantness and ugliness. I'm not sure. I'm really, really not sure.
You mean the language she's using is so elevated that it kind of seems to you similar to the way Romeo and Juliet talk, that they're just sort of youngsters putting on this guise of incredible emotional depth, like she's just sort of projecting?
Well, yes, in a way. I think she's looking at Hamlet and saying, what happened to that really interesting, intelligent man? What noble mind is here o'erthrown? And she's upset, she's dejected and wretched. But she says, how woe is me to have seen what I have seen and see what I see, not feel what I have felt and feel what I feel now, or a comparable a word that would have been used in this time period. This is almost clinical in a way to me.
That's interesting that she's already sort of emotionally distant from him, and maybe was the whole time. That the sadness she expresses here is more aesthetic, almost like she's sad to see a beautiful painting torn up than to see a lover go crazy.
Well, and I also wonder about this too. Regardless of whether it was true love, her father says, I forbid you to see Hamlet. And she agrees, she obeys her father. We don't really have a sense of time and how much time passes here, but generally, unless you're wildly rebellious, which Ophelia does not seem to me to be that sort of temperament, I think that time might leaven her own feelings. And, she might have that moment to step back and say, okay, let me just think how important this is to me.
Interesting. So we end up seeing Hamlet as having this sort of residual love for Ophelia later in the play, more than Ophelia retains love for Hamlet.
I think Ophelia works very hard at moving beyond what she felt for Hamlet. She can't separate herself from it completely, but I think she tries pretty hard. But then that's my bias, which we can talk about later.
And there is certainly the potential to play Ophelia as a lot more saucy and rebellious. When in that first scene where she's talking to Laertes and Polonius, she can be sort of smiling and joking and feeling almost superior, just as well as she could be played modest and meek and compliant. And that choice that the actress needs to make will also inform this next scene a great deal. This is the play within a play, where Hamlet has devised an entertainment which will mimic the way Claudius killed Hamlet's father, and his goal is to see how Claudius reacts to this. But as he enters the room where this play is going on, he makes straight for Ophelia, and the Queen Gertrude, his mother, calls to him, and she says, "Come hither, my dear Hamlet, sit by me." And he says, "No, good mother, here's metal more attractive," looking at Ophelia. So he approaches her and says, "Lady, shall I lie in your lap?"
No, my lord.
I mean my head upon your lap.
Aye, my lord.
Do you think I meant country matters?
I think nothing, my lord.
That's a fair thought to lie between maids' legs.
What is, my lord?
Nothing.
You are merry, my lord.
Who, I?
Aye, my lord.
O God, you're only jig-maker. What should a man do but be merry? For look you how cheerfully my mother looks, and my father died within these 2 hours.
Nay, 'tis twice 2 months, my lord.
So long? Nay, then let the devil wear black, for I'll have a suit of sables. Oh, heavens! Died 2 months ago and not forgotten yet? Then there's hope a great man's memory may outlive his life half a year. But by Our Lady he must build churches then, or else shall he suffer not thinking on. With the hobby horse whose epitaph is 4-0, the hobby horse is forgot. Then there's a dumb show, sort of a goofy, lighthearted entertainment. Ophelia turns to Hamlet and says,
What means this, my lord?
Marry, this is miking mallecho. It means mischief.
Belike this show imports the argument of the play.
We shall know by this fellow. The players cannot keep counsel, they'll tell all.
Will he tell us what this show meant?
Aye, or any show that you'll show him. Be not you ashamed to show. He'll not shame to tell you what it means.
You are not. You are not. I'll mark the play.
Is this a prologue or the posy of a ring?
'Tis brief, my lord.
As woman's love. The actors who Hamlet is going to have reenact the murder scene enter, and after a certain amount of back and forth, the player king, playing Hamlet's father, falls asleep, and the murderer, playing Claudius, enters. And Hamlet says, "This is one Lucianus, nephew to the king."
You are as good as a chorus, my lord.
I could interpret between you and your love if I could see the puppets dallying.
You are keen, my lord, you are keen.
It would cost you a groaning to take off my edge.
Still better, and worse.
So you must take your husband's. Begin, murderer, pox, leave thy damnable faces, and begin. Come, the croaking raven doth bellow for revenge. The actor does the poisoning, and Hamlet says, he poisons him in the garden for his estate. His name's Gonzaga, the story is extant, and writ in choice Italian. You shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzaga's wife.
The king rises.
What, frighted with false fire?
I never know if Ophelia gradually comes to Hamlet's side in a way that is more friendly than amorous. I think she starts out in this scene trying to be very formal, trying to push him away, and actually trying to be very terse, lest he get the wrong impression. And yet at the end, the king rises. Well, the king is rising at that moment because he realizes that this play mimics what actually happened.
And Ophelia is the one who gets that line, which is an incredibly important line in the compass of the play, because this is the confirmation Hamlet needs that, or at least, in Hamlet's mind, that Claudius is guilty of this crime, and thus Hamlet is justified in carrying out his revenge. Do you see any significance in that Ophelia gets the line?
Given that Hamlet kept the information from her, kept her from all the planning, the play within the play, the beginning, the knowledge of the ghost and everything, all she gets for information is watching this play.
She's as close to an objective observer as we have at this point.
And so, yes, I think that when she says the king rises, we have more than just Hamlet going, yeah, goody, I've got the information I need. We have Ophelia confirming things and maybe on some level letting Hamlet know, you might have let me in on this one.
I never thought of it that way, where Ophelia is actually sort of chiding Hamlet.
Maybe not. Maybe not. It's just something that I started to feel there, that she figures it out. She figures out what's been going on. Maybe not all the details, but she knows this play is more than just a play. She knows there's something Hamlet wants to prove. And whatever that is, the proof Hamlet arranged worked.
Yeah, it sounds like when she and Hamlet are talking about the prologue, and Hamlet says, the players cannot keep counsel, they'll tell all. And Ophelia says, will he tell us what this show meant? That seems like kind of her moment of awakening to me. But I do see, as we go on, Ophelia becoming a little more friendly and relaxed with Hamlet. You know, the joke like, you're as good as a chorus, my lord. But Hamlet is sort of resolutely nasty to her.
Well, I think you could see that line as unpleasant. You know, you're as good as a chorus.
Like, why don't you shut up and let me watch the play?
I don't see it as that, but you could certainly play it as that. Like, leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just shut up.
So next to Ophelia's big moment, Hamlet has accidentally stabbed Polonius as Polonius is spying on Hamlet talking to his mother in her private chambers. So Polonius is dead, and Ophelia has been off the scene for a while, and we just hear that she's been taken very poorly. Gertrude and Claudius are on the stage at this point, as well as a servant, I believe. So enter Ophelia, kind of stumbling around. At least that's how most actresses play it. Very dressed in like a tatty white robe of some sort, obviously disheveled.
Some people play it that she's been bound or kept in a room where she could not do herself harm. Where is the beauteous majesty of Denmark?
Queen Gertrude says. How now, Ophelia?
How should I your true love know from one another? By his cockle hat and staff, and his sandal shoon.
Alas, sweet lady, what imports this song?
Say you? Nay, pray you, mark. He is dead and gone, lady, he is dead and gone. At his head a grass-green turf, at his heels a stone.
Nay, but Ophelia.
Pray you, mark. White his shroud as the mountain snow.
Alas, look here, my lord.
Larded with sweet flowers, which bewept to the grave did go, with true love showers.
Claudius says, how do you, pretty lady?
Well, God ill do. They say the owl was a baker's daughter. Lord, we know what we are, but know not what we may be. God be at your table.
Conceit upon her father.
Pray you, let's have no words of this. But when they ask you what it means, say you this. Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and I a maid at your window to be your Valentine. Then up he rose, and donned his clothes, and up to the chamber door, let in the maid, that out a maid never departed more.
Pretty Ophelia!
Indeed, la, without an oath, I'll make an end on't. By Giz and by Saint Charity, alack and why for shame, young men will do it if they come to it. By cock they are to blame. Quoth she, before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed. So would I have done by yonder sun, and thou hast not come to my bed.
How long has she been thus?
I hope all will be well. We must be patient, but I cannot choose but weep to think they shall lay him in the cold ground. My brother shall know of it. And so I thank you for your good counsel. Come, my coach, Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night. Good night.
In comes Laertes, recently returned from France and enraged that Claudius has let Polonius die. How now? What noise is that? Oh, heat, dry up my brains! Tears 7 times salt, burn out the sense and virtue of mine eye. By heaven, thy madness shall be paid by weight, till our scale turn the beam. Oh, Rose of May, dear maid, kind sister, sweet Ophelia. Oh, heavens, is possible a young maid's wits should be as mortal as an old man's life? Nature is fine in love, and where 'tis fine, it sends some precious instance of itself after the thing it loves.
They bore him barefaced on the bier, hey nonny, nonny, hey nonny, and in his grave rained many a tear. Fare you well, my dove.
Hadst thou thy wits and didst persuade revenge, it could not move thus.
You must sing a down, and you call him a downer. Oh, how sweet the wheel becomes it. It is the false steward that stole his master's daughter.
This nothing's more than matter.
There's rosemary, that's for remembrance. Pray, love, remember. And there's pansies, that's for thoughts.
A document in madness, thoughts and remembrance fitted.
There's fennel for you, and columbines. There's rue for you, and here's some for me. We may call it herb grace o' Sundays. Oh, you must wear your rue with a difference. There's a daisy. I would give you some violets, but they withered all when my father died. They say he made a good end. For bonny sweet Robin is all my joy.
Thought and affliction, passion, hell itself, she turns to favour and to prettiness.
And will he not come again? And will he not come again? No, no, he is dead. Go to thy deathbed. He never will come again. His beard was as white as snow, all flaxen was his poll. He is gone, and we cast away moan. God have mercy on his soul. And of all Christian souls, I pray God be with ye. Some days later, Gertrude appears before Claudius and Laertes, and she's visibly upset, and she tells them a tale. There is a willow grows aslant a brook that shows his whole leaves in the glassy stream. There with fantastic garlands did she come, of crowflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples that liberal shepherds give a grosser name, but our cold maids do dead men's fingers call them. There, on the pendant boughs, her coronet weeds clamouring to hang, an envious sliver broke, when down her weedy trophies and herself fell into the weeping brook, her clothes spread wide and mermaid-like, awhile they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old tunes as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. But long it could not be, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. Well, I think the real question we need to ask from this scene is, well, I guess there are a couple of questions. One of them, is this madness? Or is this grief? And just a very deep grief, because there's not much you could point to as pinning this whole problem on Hamlet. She's got that Valentine snitch of song and snippet of song, and I think you might be able to read that Hamlet did her badly and that they did lie together. But mostly this is about grief for her father. And it does not seem that she's blamed Hamlet for her father's death. If it's grief, and if it's deep grief, I'm not sure how people of that time reacted to it. I think they would have not known quite what to do with it. And I think there was sort of this assumption that you move beyond it, and you do so fairly quickly. They certainly thought that of Gertrude as well earlier. So, is she mad? Is she sad? The second question I have about this scene is, did she commit suicide, or was it an accident? And I think there's the only information we have is what Gertrude says. And I think it's entirely possible to climb upon a tree, to be extraordinarily distressed and not aware of what you're doing, and fall into a brook. She's chanting songs. She's not really aware of what's happening to her. I don't feel in those lines an enormous amount of intention.
In Gertrude's lines.
In Gertrude's lines, in her telling of what happened to Ophelia.
Although believing that would have to argue more toward the madness than the sadness, wouldn't it? Or at least temporary madness, because Ophelia is lying in the brook as her clothes are getting heavier and not moving.
I think grief can do that, though. It can sort of disconnect you from the real world that you're living in now. The thing to remember is what we talked about earlier. The primary shaper of Ophelia's world has just died. And there's a lot of ink given over to the fact that she all of a sudden is, no pun intended, set adrift. I'm not sure I could take it as far as a number of scholars take it, but I certainly think that in a state of grief, we do not always think so clearly. I mean, I've lost my mother and father. I've lost people who are terribly close to me. And I know, how distorted your thinking can be afterwards. You take blame for things that aren't yours to, take blame for. I think grief can do very strange things to your awareness of the world around you. Whether that's madness, I think that's up for grabs.
Which reflects also on our interpretation of Hamlet's actions.
Mm-hmm. Well, presumably we know Hamlet is aware of exactly what he's doing.
Well, that's up for grabs, too.
The other thing it's always made me wonder since high school, why didn't Gertrude help? Gertrude watched this and was able to recount it with such detail. Why didn't she help? Was she recording it on her iPhone? Was she, calling up a friend? Was she sitting there with her hand over her mouth, paralyzed? Is it another Kitty Genevieve? Why didn't she race out and help? Or call to somebody to help? I don't think that Gertrude is filled with any kind of malice, but I do think that she's sensitive to the difficulties that a woman adrift without men to guide her are in a sorry state. And she's not sure she wishes that on Ophelia. So, don't know, just another thought to throw out there.
And of course, there's one more step to take, which is that Ophelia, there's the possibility that Ophelia is pregnant. As she's naming all the flowers, and of course, so much thought has gone into to whom does she give the flowers, and why does she choose the ones that she chose? Is there a meaning in it? And there are meanings attached to each of the flowers that she gives that would apparently have been fairly well known to the audiences of the time. But Shakespeare notoriously hardly ever writes stage directions. In fact, I think he only ever wrote 4, including the famous exit pursued by a bear from The Winter's Tale. So the choice of how to distribute the flowers is up to the director and the actress entirely. Who is she giving the pansies to? Who is she giving the rue to? We don't know. And the other option, really, in interpreting all these flowers is that almost all of them were folk remedies for abortion at the time. They were many of them used to abort a child.
Well, particularly rue. It's interesting because nobody gives directions, but there are 2 primary ways that directors handle this. One is that the pansies are given to Hamlet, even though he's not there. And not the pansies. Rosemary is given to Hamlet. Pansies are given to Laertes. The fennel and the columbine are given to Claudius. And the rue is given to Gertrude, and the daisy is just sort of tossed aside. The other way to do it is there's no Hamlet involved in this, and Laertes gets both rosemary and the pansies. But rue is the critical piece in here because rue is technically a poison. And one of the ways that herbalists induce abortion is by essentially giving the body enough poison that it expels the fetus. So rue is a known abortifacient at the time. She says we can call it herb grace Sundays. Rue is also something that you took with you every Sunday, and in the holy water that's by the front door, you swish it in the holy water. And what this does is it sort of works toward exorcising your sins. So, it's an exorcism of a fetus. It's an exorcism of sin. Rue is very, very, very important. And when she gives Gertrude and she says, you must wear your rue with a difference, because Gertrude's sin is the sin of marriage too soon after the death of her husband, and potentially incest.
I always think of it that Gertrude's sin is having Hamlet and causing this mess in the first place. Other readers have suggested that maybe a lot of Ophelia's words in this scene were just sort of calculated to shock, either by Shakespeare or intentionally by Ophelia, that, she's singing about maids getting deflowered and, people having sex, and then she's throwing around all these plants that were known to be sort of the cures that the commoners would use. Commoners would know what these herbs were for, and it would just be shocking that Ophelia was throwing around abortifacients and the roughness that she was displaying there.
Well, and some of these flowers also represent things like deceit and false character and so forth. So there's, there's not necessarily a complete focus on the fact that she might have been pregnant at that point. And those who believe that she is pregnant see in that yet another form of oppression, that she is unmarried, she's likely to remain unmarried, and yet she's had a child, so she would not be thought of well by society.
But the potential that she's pregnant led you to another thought about why Gertrude watched her die.
Because being pregnant and having a child in a world that would condemn you for that would be very difficult for somebody like Ophelia, even as strong as she is, if you see her as strong, to cope with. And what that made me think one night was, this play is in many ways about fragile character and about the fragility of life and the fragility of our mind and the fragility of relationships. And we see that, and it's, we're kind of like, somebody knocks on our door to let us know in the character of Ophelia.
What I took from when you first explained that to me was that Gertrude is answering Hamlet's question in the to be or not to be speech. Is it better to survive and to bear the whips and scorns of time, or is it better to end things? Right? Hamlet can't quite decide about this. His eventual, temporary conclusion is that what might happen to you in death is too scary for you to take your own life. But if Gertrude watches Ophelia die and lets it happen because she thinks it's the best thing for Ophelia, that's her answer to the question, that it's better to die than to bear the whips and scorns of time.
Well, the interesting thing to me is in listening to and reading Gertrude's little monologue, which is actually, she never says more than this through the entire play. She's almost a non-entity. But I just don't see anything that suggests she believes Ophelia killed herself. But whatever happened, I think I get the impression Gertrude let it happen.
So it's almost this very subtle feminist critique of male society that Shakespeare consciously or unconsciously buried and might not be dug up by anyone who's not looking for it. But if Gertrude let her die, and the fascinating thing is that no one asks her when she tells them this. She's telling this to Laertes and Claudius as they're planning how to kill Hamlet and make it look like an accident. No one asks her, so why didn't you do anything? Like, you just stood there? They just kind of take it at face value and move on. If Gertrude let this happen, then it's an acknowledgement in some way that the lot Ophelia would face is hard enough. It's enough of a burden that being dead might be the better option for her, which is a really sad thought. But in a way, it's echoing what Polonius and Laertes tell her at the beginning, isn't it? That Hamlet has Hamlet and perhaps by extension men have the wherewithal to do these things and to kind of, dally with young women without having staining their character in any lasting way. But Ophelia, and by extension women, possibly, don't have that luxury. They don't have that latitude. Perhaps to Gertrude, that truth is big enough and serious enough that letting Ophelia die is saving her from it more than it's sending her off to this terrible and uncertain next world.
And I think we have to remember that in that time, we cannot get inside the mind of someone who's writing, making music, whatever, in the Middle Ages. So the best we can do is imagine and try to push our own modern understanding to the back burner. But the suicide is a mortal sin, as a huge mortal sin. You don't get buried in consecrated ground if you've committed suicide. And I think that even if Ophelia did commit suicide, Gertrude would not let on that she did. Best that we try to at least get her into consecrated ground. I happen to think that Ophelia is a stronger character than that. And yet she is also an obedient daughter. She obeys her father. She might not like it, but you don't fight it. And she is not going to commit a mortal sin. I just don't get the impression she's that sort of woman.
And I suppose it should be acknowledged that there's this doubt raised later in the play as well. When Hamlet is spying on her funeral, he first observes that they're conducting maimed rites for Ophelia, that the rites they're conducting aren't normal or full. And he says it betokens the dead person committed suicide. And then it seems like Gertrude and Claudius and Laertes have exercised some pressure on the priest conducting the ceremony to make it as official and religious as possible. And the priest is pushing back, saying, her obsequies have been as far enlarged as we have warrant, because her death was doubtful. So we think it's suicide, but we're not sure. So they go the step of allowing her to be buried in consecrated ground, but they're not going to give her the full rites because the suspicion is that she committed suicide.
Hamlet comes back after he's been away for some while with Horatio. He has had some time to cool down, and when he sees Ophelia lying there, he does profess his love. And while it sounds a little excessive, it also rings true.
As does Gertrude. Gertrude says that she wished Ophelia had been her daughter, had married Hamlet. And as I've tried to think about the last scenes in Hamlet, where Hamlet seems so rational and so not like he was for the rest of the play, he shakes Laertes' hands and says, "I've done thee wrong, and I beg your pardon." And Laertes very grudgingly gives it. But of course, by the end of the fight, Laertes has sort of come to accept that Hamlet is actually a little more noble than he gave him credit for at first. What wrought this change in Hamlet, or this return to sanity possibly? And I've always pegged the moment at his realization that the person being buried is Ophelia. For a number of reasons, I suppose. I guess because this is the first time in the play that he's actually seen the death of someone he loves. He killed Polonius, but there's not really an inclination that he loved Polonius. He looked at Polonius's dead body, but he sees Ophelia's dead body, and this sort of brings home to him, in my mind, that all the dying that he's been playing around with, all the hypotheticals, have finally become real. That death isn't just this sort of game to be played, this concept to be toyed with, to be or not to be. He's treating it like it's this abstract ideal, perhaps because he is an academic. And now he sees that it's not abstract and that it can happen. And this is sort of what brings him back, that all this goofing around that he's been doing, essentially, it's foolish and immature.
And it has real-world repercussions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just something that, is contained in himself. It's something that spills over in the lives of everyone around him.
And I also see it as a message, both to Hamlet and to all of us, as you were talking about earlier with fragility, that we're foolish to assume that we control these events and that we can dictate the future, which is what Hamlet has been trying to do the entire play and finding it very difficult to do. And my favorite line from the play, which he says to Horatio once he's invited to this fencing match that Claudius and Laertes have set up, where they'll trick Hamlet into getting killed. And you get the sense that both Horatio and Hamlet know this is coming, and that there's some understanding, unspoken understanding between them, that Hamlet is not going to survive this fight. And Horatio says, "Well, if you have any doubts at all, don't go." And Hamlet answers, "We defy augury. There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. That our lives are not predictable. Destiny has no control over us. And yet there's a sort of beauty in each coincidental action, in each accidental moment that becomes real the second it happens." Perhaps Ophelia's death was the fall of the sparrow that brought him to this conclusion, that death is just, in some cases, it's an accident, that we are so fragile that it can just happen to us momentarily. We can't predict when these things are going to happen, and we can't control them the way we'd like to think we can. We defy augury.
And I think, in coming round, Ophelia has always been an enigma to me. She defies augury as well. And directors have made wildly different choices about how their Ophelia will come across. Scholars have created multiple personas for Ophelia. And I don't think there's just one Ophelia. I think there are many Ophelias. And we were just talking about this earlier. I was thinking about it as I was trying to go to sleep last night. I think for us today, at least, for the modern realization, is that Ophelia is who we need her to be. If we need her to be a strong woman who is undone by grief, as are we all, then that's who she is. If we need her to be an oppressed woman who loses the men in her life, her brother gone, her father dead, Hamlet, toddling along mad on his own, if we need that level of oppression, her obedience, we'll see it. We'll see her as that. If we need her to be meek, that's who we'll see. If we need to see somebody commit suicide for the utter fall, the standing on the precipice and tumbling into the abyss that happened to her essentially when her father died, then that's what we'll see. We'll see suicide. If you want to see her as stronger, as somebody who's in grief and will eventually overcome grief, we have the evidence that she overcame it with Hamlet, then we're going to see an accident. And we're going to ask ourselves, what would have become of that girl who committed suicide or who died accidentally? What might have been her fate? Was she saved from that fate, or was she denied that fate?
So in a sense, Ophelia, more than anyone else in this play, challenges us to make our own answers.
Yes, I agree.
She's the one that challenges us to look into ourselves and figure out what we want to see and what that tells us about us, as much as what it tells us about her.
And as much as what it tells us about the play.
Well, this is all the time we have this week. Mom, thank you so much, as always, for coming on.
It is always fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. This is Our Brief Hour. We'll see you again next week at 7 o'clock sharp, Friday morning. Have a great Friday, have a great weekend, and take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.